Hi everyone, welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this bonus season, we've been reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends. Welcome to the final installment, episode 14 of what we're calling season 2.5, where we're covering Birgitte's point of view. I'm your co-host Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimarus, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, and we may drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today we are examining Birgitte Silverbow's perspectives in Knife of Dreams, Chapter 32, Towers of Midnight, Chapter 22, and A Memory of Light, Chapters 12 and Epilogue. So I'll get us started with Knife of Dreams, Chapter 32, entitled To Keep the Bargain. Since this is our first Birgitte perspective in the series, I'm going to give us a quick summary just to set the stage of what's happening at this point in time. Rand has just lost most of a hand to Semirog. Matt and the band are just beginning their fast and furious attacks against the Xianchan forces to pull them out of the Molvine Gap. Fail has just been rescued from Malden, thank God. And Elaine is now nearing the end of her bid for the Lion Throne of Andor. She had just entered the house of some dark friends, looking for Black Aja sisters, along with Carrie-Anne, Vandene, and Saritha. Carrie-Anne wound up being a black sister herself and the murderer of Adeleus, so Vandene kills her, while the Black Aja then kill Vandene and Saritha and kidnaps Elaine. So now Chapter 32 begins with Birgitte standing alongside some other warders and soldiers just outside the house, waiting as their Aes Sedai deal with the Black Sisters within. They can all feel that something is wrong, but they don't know what, so they continue following their orders and staying put. Suddenly the other warders burst into action, yelling and attacking, running at the house with fury. Knowing that this signaled the death of their Aes Sedai, Birgitte keeps a cool head and quickly leads the soldiers back to the palace. She can feel that Elaine is still alive and unafraid. Back at the palace yard, she barks orders to mobilize as many soldiers as she can and meets Charles Gaibon and Diellen in the map room to update them and to formulate a plan to rescue Elaine. All of this is compounded by the fact that Amarilla has simultaneously begun moving her forces against Camlin, and reports are coming in that some mercenary troops had turned and were trying to take one of the other city gates. They just didn't have the manpower to fight on all three fronts. They would have to end this rescue and end the battle for the gate before Amarilla arrived with her army. Birgitte asked the 8 Windfinders there in the palace to create a gateway to bring a few thousand men outside the city to face the Black Aja channelers and to rescue Elaine. The Windfinders balked, as they would not take part in this war of secession, and Birgitte had to bully them into agreeing. As the soldiers began pouring out of the gateway and turning to face the oncoming dark friends, the Black Aja sisters started raining fireballs and lightning into their ranks. Gaibon ordered a charge, more to make his men moving targets than anything at this point. Then one of the Black Aja began using her Terangrial to create bars of balefire, and men and horses were vaporized. Birgitte grabbed the Windfinder Chanel Din Saran Whiteshark by the arm. She's the one who led the circle of channelers, and marched her through the gateway as well. The other Windfinders followed. Quote, "What did you want me to see?" Chanel demanded. "This," Birgitte said, gesturing at the scene in front of them. End quote. Gaibon and his men were charging full out now, not just moving to avoid the lightning. Their ranks were being decimated, and their only hope was that some of them could reach the Black Aja channelers before they were all destroyed. Here's another quote. "This," Chanel said incredulously. "I have no desire to watch men die." "Then stop it," Birgitte said. End quote. Birgitte then went on to explain that if the Windfinders did not help rescue Elaine, there would be no bargain with Andor. Elaine's bargain would be a very lucrative deal for the Windfinders, and it's one that they wanted to keep at all costs, even though they had been ordered not to help in this war. But if they wanted to keep the bargain, then they had to save Elaine. More lightning flew through the air, but this time it was directed at the Aes Sedai who was creating the balefire. One of the horses pulling Elaine's carriage was also struck, and the enemy group ground to a halt. Quickly the Windfinders shielded and bound all of the Dark Friends as Birgitte gave orders to take everyone alive. And the chapter ends with this quote, "The bond had never once carried any hint of fear." End quote.
Thank you for giving us the kind of recap on Birgitte's story before you got to your chapter. But then, I guess specifically, this chapter, it being Birgitte's first point of view, it shows us the kind of deliberation that Birgitte has about her relationship to Elaine. I mean, this whole time she's been figuring it out anyway, even before we got to this point. But here we get to see what it's like to be in her head while she's having to figure out how to trust Elaine and how to interact with her, and especially when people are watching. And it's this ongoing process between the two. I think about how they need to learn how to trust each other. Birgitte is not a completely obedient warder, as we know, like most of them are expected to be.
Oh, that's an understatement.
She wants to protect Elaine kind of unconditionally, but she has to obey Elaine's orders in view of others so that she can help Elaine grow her political power and cinch the succession here. But unfortunately, Elaine is an incredibly difficult person to have to do this with because she gets herself and these other Aes Sedai, as we saw, into very dangerous situations, and this makes Birgitte's choices really hard. It makes her job very hard. And so in this chapter, she ends up having to give orders contrary to the ones that Elaine had left behind with her in order to save Elaine's life. I mean, she was basically told by Elaine, don't do anything unless I yell for you. And Elaine didn't have the ability to cry out, but Birgitte still had to decide to intervene. Now, she had to go collect some more people first in order to do that. She couldn't just barge into the house or anything, but she ended up doing the right thing and ended up having to break her orders to do that. But luckily, I don't think that piece of it was done in an incredibly public-facing way, which normally Birgitte's interactions with Elaine, a lot of them are very public-facing, and she does have to do a lot to save face and help Elaine grow her power, like I said earlier. But in this case, it worked out best for both of them, I think.
Right. Which is something I didn't think of until we were just discussing this and what you said about Birgitte not being a very obedient warder. In many parts of the story, it talks about how Aes Sedai use the warder bond to kind of coerce their warders or force them to do things or garner obedience from them. And to me, it borderlines on compulsion, although evidently there's enough of a distinction that it is not an issue with them ethically, but it's very close borderline. But we don't see that in action among many of the main characters in the story. We don't really see Egwene using that with Gawain once he's bonded to her. We don't really see, at all. We don't see Birgitte responding the way warders typically respond to their Aes Sedai. And I wonder to myself, is part of this because perhaps Elaine, had not been shown the weave. She had overseen someone using them. Maybe she didn't do it quite right. Or does it have to do with the dynamics of male versus female? Perhaps an Aes Sedai who is bonding a man, he responds entirely differently than this rare and one-off of an Aes Sedai bonding a woman as a warder. What are your thoughts on that? What creates this unique situation between these two that seems so different from other warder bonds?
So I think we are meant to believe that it's a gendered issue, and much like many of the things involving the magic system in this series, like healing somebody who has been stilled or gentled, needs to be done by the opposite gender so that the person can get their previous power levels back. Yes. Otherwise, they're left diminished, like Swan and Lyanna. And Birgitte and Elaine have a strange mirroring to their bond. I don't know that there is the ability even to compel Birgitte, because Elaine, especially kind of earlier on in her character arc, is a little demanding, and she probably would have tried stuff like that. I mean, she and
Yes.
Nynaeve especially are just sort of kind of willing to overstep boundaries, I feel like, to kind of get what they think they need right then. Sort of like the way Elaine kept trying to get the medallion from Matt, for example.
Right.
So there may be like a magical difference there that influences their relationship, but I also think part of it is that the Aes Sedai do abuse the water bond. I do think that it is too close to compulsion. I think that the distinction between those things is more one in name, and maybe the literal configuration of the weave is different, but in effect, in its impacts, it can be pretty much the same. I think maybe a difference of degree rather than kind in terms of the impact. So I think that Elaine's relationship with Birgitte here is to show us that you can have something different with the water bond, not only by rethinking the gender of who you can bond, but just rethinking what their relationship is supposed to be, whether they are supposed to just be like a muscly servant who gets kind of a level up in some of their powers, or whether they can be a true companion. And I think it's just one of the many variations that we get to see with like the women who go to the White Tower and get bonded by, or who choose to bond consenting Ashaman. And we get to see the very different relationships that those folks can have too. Like Pivara and Andral, even though that's an opposite gender bond, they're both channelers.
Right.
And neither of them seems to be able to compel the other. Right. So in that way, it seems, I'm not really sure. It seems more, they're on an equal playing field for sure compared to all these other water bonds where we tend to see a power imbalance. Now in Birgitte and Elaine's situation, Birgitte just pushes back on that power imbalance, and Elaine is willing to accept somebody with that challenging role in her life instead of a yes man. So I think that's why it works for them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I might have answered your question in a really politician
no.
kind of way, but those are my thoughts about it.
As the story develops, we find so many exceptions to this, such as this one with Birgitte and Elaine. It seems to be an exception to how the water bond typically works. Then when the Ashaman begin bonding Aes Sedai, now that's very much like compulsion, because the women are in absolute obedience to them and seem to just fall in love with them. They have a hard time controlling their own thoughts. So that one is very weird. And the men, I guess, were having to guess at what the water bond was like, but it definitely, in my opinion, steps over the line of compulsion. But, perhaps something that we can hope will be adjusted in the future.
Right. But I think now that we see the mutually beneficial ones, like with Pivara and Andral, and then the Aes Sedai who ended up bonding, they initiated the bonds with some younger Ashaman and stuff. Those turned out to be working pretty well, it looked like, too.
Yeah, because bonding another channeler is entirely different from bonding a non-channeler, because they've already discussed how, I think it was from one of the Forsaken's point of view, that the water bond was something akin to forming a circle. When people bond their powers together, they're working together in a circle, except you're doing it with a non-channeler. So it's kind of weird in the fact that they even came up with it to begin with. Yet when they're doing it amongst other channelers, either an Ashaman bonding an Aes Sedai, or an Aes Sedai bonding an Ashaman, then you get more closeness. There is, again, the Ashaman were using compulsion on the Aes Sedai, but the Aes Sedai were not doing it the other way around. In fact, they couldn't. If I remember correctly, the Aes Sedai bond, they could not force obedience. Alana could never force any kind of obedience out of Rand, no matter how hard she tried. And she would just be in her rooms crying many times because she could feel his pain, and he was in constant pain. She was trying to kind of work with him, and she could not work with him in any way. She couldn't compel him to do anything. In fact, it seemed to make him even more stubborn. And so bonding someone who can channel is entirely different from bonding someone who cannot channel. But we tend to see, in this case, I think there may be some type of gender inequality there. That a woman bonding a woman just is not the same kind of bond. Yet I don't know. It's wow. I totally lost my train of thought there. Um, yeah, when you have a woman bonding a woman, it's kind of different. Yet at the same time, I still think it might have been part of Elaine's not being used to bonding and maybe not doing the weaves exactly right that caused this bond to be different because they seem closer in some ways, and yet she has no direct control over Brigitte, which again works in her favor. Um, that's probably best because outside the bond itself, you don't see Elaine and Brigitte working together the way they should, and that's typically Elaine's fault. My mind goes back to seeing how Moiraine and Lan work together. She's the one who was the Aes Sedai and who was in charge and could channel the power. Lan is, he appears to be hired muscle, yet at the same time, she knew not to do things that would damage his pride, that would in any way make him compromise who he is. And so she knew who he was and she worked with him that way. Now, Elaine.
Up to a point.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Up to a point until she decided to transfer the bond, I think.
Yes. But if she had just told him to whom the bond would be transferred, I think he would have been a lot better off. But yes.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Not
the ultimate destination, yeah. She did tell him about
right.
Morel, and he wasn't happy with that.
No,
but
no.
yeah.
But yeah, that is one that for the most part, when they were on the job, they were focused and, they had a lot of balance between them, which I guess is what you should have. Elaine could be a little bossy. Again, she's young and she really hasn't, she's learned a lot about leadership, but she hasn't learned enough about life yet. So yeah, she could be kind of bossy and want things her way. And because of that, she and Brigitte don't work together as well. She kind of forces Brigitte to have to work for her. As in this case, she's not afraid at all. She walks right in, and she never has one moment of fear. And I think she explains later it's because, well, I knew you were there. I knew you would never give up. I'm like, well, yeah, but you don't have to put yourself in these situations, and
right.
make you have to depend on me. You could listen to me a little bit beforehand, listen to some of the caution. So I just think it's cool to kind of explore the water bond and how it works, but we're described how it works in the story, and then we rarely ever get to see it work that way. All we see after that is exception after exception after exception to how it's not working the way it was originally described. But it's still fun, and I like to see the progression of it change as you get different ideas and different mixtures here, as we said, with channelers and non-channelers, men and women, and seeing how it all responds differently.
I think something else we learn about, or not learn necessarily in this chapter, but one thing I noticed in this chapter, and is probably kind of systemic throughout the rest of Birgitte's arc, is that not only does she sort of refuse to be bossed in some ways, like she would never, unless she, had to, again, save face. She's not one to just listen to something Elaine says and just go along with it because Elaine said it. She's even free to kind of argue with her in kind of the war room situations and strategy and planning and everything. But she reminds me of another character we have discussed at length, Matt, of course. They have a lot of parallels. One of the things I noticed in this chapter specifically is that she doesn't seem concerned with any ideology, and this is very similar to Matt. Both of them do what they feel to be the right thing in the moment, and they end up doing these types of things fairly instinctively without a ton of planning ahead of time. But Brigitte doesn't care a fig for Andor, really. She only cares about Andor because she cares about Elaine, right? She has no sense of patriotism for the place. She has no sense of what is really honorable for a queen to be doing or whatever. She knows about those things, but those are not the types of things that motivate her. She can play along when she has to in view of other people to whom that matters. And she understands that it's for Elaine's good, because if people oppose her succession, they would probably also try to kill her. So those goals can be kind of tied up with each other, but she doesn't really care about the throne,
Right.
and about Andor and nobility and honor and any of the queenly things Elaine is supposed to be doing. We see this in how she talks to Dylan, who cares more about the throne than about Elaine as a person. Not that she dislikes Elaine or has no care for her, but she is definitely a lot more concerned with the politics. So we get to see those two viewpoints clash in this chapter, with Birgitte's winning out.
But yeah, I agree that Birgitte comes to this completely different and fresh perspective. And you can imagine why, because she has owed allegiance to hundreds of different nations in her memories. And, she views that from a different perspective. Someone who was not raised in Andor, because, from her earlier lives, she can remember a time there was no Andor. And it was entirely different maps with entirely different borders. So, she cares about it because Elaine cares about it. She cares about saving Elaine and being Elaine's friend. That's one of the things I like about their relationship, is she is really more interested in being Elaine's friend than she is in being Elaine's warder. I mean, even though that's kind of tied in together. And I like Birgitte's openness. She's an honest person. She's one of these that just doesn't have time to deal with the drama of what's the word I'm trying to think of? Hypocrisy, trying to pretend one thing and do another. That's one reason she and Matt have so many similarities. But that's one of the things that makes her an interesting character. She is going to be the same whether she's with the Queen of Andor or any other country, as she is with the maidservant that comes in. She's going to be the same person with both. She's not going to put on airs or pretend to be something she isn't. She doesn't have to pretend to be some hero out of legend. So she could just be herself. And I like that. I like the way in this chapter we see her. She doesn't argue with people. She doesn't get drawn into things like that. When she runs into the courtyard to gather troops and get with Gaibon and get a plan of what they're going to do, she just starts telling some of the guardswomen who were there, okay, you do this, you do that. And said she resisted the urge to turn to see if they were doing it because she knew they were. She didn't have to be mean about any of it. She didn't have to be bossy about any of it. But because she's not normally that way, when she gives an order, people respond to it. Just, hey, you go do this, and you just walk on. And that shows a level of trust in them, and people respond well to that. So I like it that she can be in charge without having to be bossy. And she can be strong without having to be mean. And that's wonderful qualities about Birgitte. She's such an awesome character to me, such a likable character to me, because she does seem so wise and in control of herself, and willing to let other people just be themselves. You leave them alone until you have to interfere with them, and when you do, you make it quick, professional, and people respond well to that. And I tend to think she's well liked by most people in Andor, except for Mellar, of course, who hated her, and of course Dylan. And we don't really ever get to the root of why she and Dylan don't get along.
It's Robert Jordan needing to insert conflict between women for some reason. He does this a lot.
Yes. I don't know, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, with most of us, not just among women, and I'm not meaning to infer that, but most of us, at times we meet someone, and from the moment you first see them, you want to spend the rest of your life avoiding them. You have no real reason why. Sometimes you can't really put your finger on it. in my mind, at least with these two, it is because they are both strong and capable and probably too much alike to ever be friends. And too much alike in the regard that they both kind of sit back and keep their mouth shut and act like they know more than they do. And that works with most people, but it doesn't work with each other in this case. But I think it could have been the exact same way had Dylan, been a man who was helping Elaine, but had this same attitude, this same calm sense of control, and wanting to walk into a room and own everyone's attention in a not a self-centered way, but almost a regal way. And Birgitte can do this. Dylan can do that. And I definitely see them butting heads. I may be totally off base. It may be, like you said, just Jordan wanting to throw that in there. I
don't know that it's conscious, but he definitely does seem to to write women as being a little more just like unnecessarily catty with each other. Look at literally Annie Aes Sedai. There you go. Right.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at that before, but that's true. Now that you said it, I can think of several examples. But I can think of several people that I've met. Just, the first time I saw them, I wished I'd never met them and never wanted to again. And I would hate to be put in a position where I had to work with them constantly like this. Yeah. So that's what my mind went to. But again, it may be something totally different. I may be off base. But yeah, they definitely do not get along. And they continue to butt heads. But at least from Birgitte's perspective, she sees this and recognizes this, rather than like a lot of people who deny it and just go around hating that person and backbiting. You don't see her doing anything to erode other people's confidence in Dylan, but you don't see her holding her tongue if it's just the three of them in a room either. So she doesn't go around bad-mouthing her or stabbing her in the back or talking bad about her in front of other people. But when it's just Elaine and these two in the room, she's not going to hold back. She's going to say what she thinks. As I said before, there's no hypocrisy, no guile with Birgitte Silverbow. She's just going to be herself. And if you don't like it, then you're just not going to be very happy around her.
Those were pretty much my thoughts on this chapter. Did you have anything else?
One thing about her memories fading. This is one of the first places I can remember it. Well, I started to say from her point of view. Of course, it's her first point of view in the story. But she had mentioned it to Elaine, but it was kind of mentioned in passing. At this point, we're starting to get the sense of that almost overwhelming sense of loss she has with it. Verbally, she plays it off like there's nothing really much to it. Yeah, okay, I'm losing these ancient memories. But inside, she's really struggling with this. It causes her a lot of self-doubt. She wonders if this is permanent, wonders if you can be basically taken out, being a hero. It leads to kind of almost a depression in a sense that she hides well, but we get a glimpse of it here and see that it's real and that it's there. But at times she still pulls up these ancient memories and uses them in great ways, very positive ways, such as when the Black Aja, are attacking. And of course, when they use balefire, those people and horses are just gone. They're out of the pattern. But those that are hit with fireballs, or those that are hit with lightning, she remembers things from the Trolloc Wars too, when the power was being used then. And she said out of, every 3 people that are knocked down, you'll see 2 get back up. They may be struggling. From every horse that falls, there'll be 2 that are shaken but still okay. So, killing large groups of people with the power initially looks worse than it is. Now, of course, if you're the one who gets hit, it's bad. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
If you're burned, or if you lose an arm, or if you lose your life, it's bad. But so you don't see just the waves of destructive power like you see at Dumas Wells, where the Ashaman are using it to just kill wave after wave of person or people. These are swaths of destruction. But again, you see a lot of people fall. But Birgitte knows it's not as devastating to the army as it looks. So she's still got these memories that are giving her the assurances. And it needs to look bad to get the Windfinders to intervene to cut this short. Hey, let's stop this. Let's rescue Elaine. She's really doing some arm twisting, slightly, literally, a lot of it figuratively, twisting the Windfinders' arms to get them to basically take place in the battle, not to secure Elaine's secession alone, but to secure Elaine's life. And basically to keep the bargain, which is, of course, the title of this chapter. You can't keep the bargain with Andor if Elaine's not in it. So you've got to do this little bit. And even though that is totally against the orders that the Windfinders have, she puts them in that position to do that. But it takes a lot of sacrifice to get there. A lot of men had to die. Now, again, as far as a percentage of the army, it winds up being rather small because the entire thing is over fairly quickly. Gaibon and the men that were with him that began this all-out headlong charge only got about halfway to the wagon before it was over with, or carriage or whatever it was they had Elaine in. So it was bad, but it could have been a lot worse. But I like to see her use these memories, whether they're direct memories or something closer to an instinct. She still uses that, and it gives her a different perspective than it would most people. And I think gives her an advantage in many ways. And that's pretty much all I've got with this one.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll go ahead and move on to my summary of Chapter 22 from Towers of Midnight, called The End of a Legend. The chapter begins with a Gowan point of view and switches to Mat's perspective. Mat tried to formulate a plan to enter the Tower of Genjai, but his plans were being hampered by all the paparazzi and assassins he's dealing with lately. He suddenly remembered that Birgitte told all of her stories about the snakes and foxes, so she must know something about them. So he tried sneaking onto the palace grounds in an obvious enough way to get apprehended. Birgitte was guarding Elaine during a play, a new fashionable form of entertainment, and got someone to cover her shift after being alerted about the stranger trying to get into the palace. She went out into the rainy night, preferable to the opera-style singing that she did not prefer, entered the guardhouse, and found none other than Mat Cawthon dicing with the guards. She claimed she would see to him now, and they went for a walk together to a nearby pub. Since Birgitte's drunkenness had affected Elaine through the water bond in the past, Birgitte was now abstaining due to an abundance of caution about the Queen's developing babes. Birgitte gawked at some ugly men, ordered them a pair of the usual, which happened to be milk, and tried to get down to business. What did Mat want? He beat around the bush for a while, but finally let out that he wanted information about the Aelfin and Eelfin. Birgitte was reluctant, though. She advised Mat to consider whoever was in there to be lost. There's no way to avoid abiding by the bargain if you go through the doorways, so they will get you. And without the doorways, going in through the tower, the creatures have even greater leeway to kill you. They're allowed to shed blood in that case. But it didn't seem to matter to Mat. He was determined to go on this surely suicidal mission. So he asked how she knows so much. Well, she had been there in a former life. So she must have gotten out, right? How? She had gone in to save Godel Kane from a terrible head injury and taken in provisions for 2 months. It was hard to say how long they lasted after those ran out. Quote, that was the end of that particular legend, end quote. The story survived perhaps due to Aes Sedai asking questions of the Aelfin. But that was why Birgitte was so dead set against Mat going, because she didn't make it out in that lifetime. A person could leave trails behind them and stay on a straight path and never make it to the bargain chamber, even if it was just a doorway away. There's got to be something like a 1 in 1,000 chance of ever making it. But for Mat, those were easy odds, he claimed. He threw a handful of coins into the air and they all landed to rest on their edges. What were the odds of that? Surely that was more rare than 1 in 1,000. But Birgitte still won't accept this and regretted giving this much information both tonight and to Oliver beforehand. And she was disappointed, too, that Mat was unfamiliar with her story of going into the tower as Jathari Moondancer. She was forgetting her past life memories, and even the local people were losing her stories and legends. Just as she started to brood some more on the prospect of her memory loss, she sensed pain and anger through the bond. Elaine was in trouble again. She and Mat went running for the exit together, and thus ends Chapter 22, The End of a Legend.
I had forgotten how this chapter opened. I'm so glad that ToM was not there with Elaine at this point, because if he had been forced to watch a play, he would have lost his mind. I remember early on with he and Rand in Kyrian when they met up
Yep.
again, and he was complaining about this very thing, how silly it was. So, yeah, he would definitely have been disappointed. But yeah, this is one we covered it a little bit with Matt's point of view and season 2, but it is it's one that leaves me a little bit sad and nostalgic. Sad because of her story of being Jathari Moondancer and going in and dying among the Elfin and the Ilfin. And you don't want to think of the heroes of the Horn dying, a kind of a meaningless death, and it's in a sense what it was. But also a little nostalgic because there are so few of these Matt and Birgitte moments, and yet I love to see each and every one of them because they seem to bring out the best in one another in a friend kind of way. Nothing romantic whatsoever. Well, I don't know, if she had seen Matt with one eye, she might have been attracted, but other than that, he was far too good looking to be attracted to her.
Right.
But to just see this friendship where the two of them can open up to each other the way they can to very few other people, talk about things that nobody else really gets. That's something that to me just kind of makes me nostalgic. I wish we could have more of these moments, not for my sake, but for theirs. It's you get so engrossed in the story you forget they're not real people, and you want to see these good things happen to them, and I wish I could have more of that for their sakes, or at least it be alluded to, that they had more of these heart to heart talks. Of course, he doesn't listen, and she wishes he would, but I like to share. I like to see them sharing this camaraderie because, strangely enough, he really has more in common with her than he does with his best friends Rand and Perrin, the guys he grew up with.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand them and is uncomfortable around them. And you see here that Birgitte and Matt are comfortable with one another, and you want to see this for them because they're both good people, and I want to see Birgitte just be able to hang out with somebody and chill. And she can do that with Elaine, but there's things Elaine will just never understand about her that, that she knows Matt does, and they don't even have to talk about it yet. They both understand it. So I like that. I feel like it gives her a degree of peace to be able to spend this kind of time with him. And, it's something I wish we could have more of in the story.
Yeah, I agree. I really like seeing them together, and these moments are precious because of how brief they are. People just hanging out, having a pretty good time. They end up getting into serious topics, but it's still fun watching these two just have a friendship. We don't get to see a lot of... I was about to say we don't get to see a lot of friendships. We don't. There's like Elaine and Avienda, and Elaine and Birgitte have a kind of a complicated friendship too. But for the most part, people are kind of having to use people or politic and stuff like that. So these moments without those concerns are precious and rare. Really, the only thing I noticed about Birgitte in this chapter that we haven't already covered, like from the time we covered this in our Matt season, is just that I've come to see Birgitte's annoyance with Matt in a slightly more nuanced way. So I think back in our Matt season, I was like, oh, interestingly, Birgitte seems to think of Matt as more lecherous than he thinks of himself. We never see him slapping behinds, but she said that she expected to see that. And stuff like that, and described his winning smile as a leer, etc. But interestingly, she wouldn't hang out with him if she really thought he was a creep. So I wonder if she's sort of exaggerating to herself, or if it seems to me like she's thinking of him as more just annoying than like a scoundrel or ruffian like Elaine and Nynaeve seem to see him. Because she still seems to enjoy hanging out with him. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot new for me to glean about her in this case. It was also good just to see the characterization, a little bit of added characterization to her. Not only is she upset about losing her memories, which pretty much everybody would be, I think.
Yes.
But she's we get to see that she had this a little bit of pride that she hadn't really acknowledged before about being a hero. She had been reluctant about having a hero role in the past and having to try to live up to all of Brigitte's past lives had been. But here her feelings are really hurt that nobody remembers that story. And so that was a nice little humanizing moment for such a big heroic figure. And I really enjoyed that from this chapter.
Right. I haven't really thought of that before. Every time she is reincarnated and spun back out by the pattern, she doesn't know about her past lives. She doesn't miss them because she can't remember them. Then in Riyadh, she can reminisce about all these past adventures and past times. Yet, every time she's incarnate, she's born, she doesn't remember any of those. So this is the only time she's been in the flesh where she is lamenting losing these old memories and ancient memories because she's never had them before in the flesh. So it has been an odd experience for her to be in a state where she should be in Riyadh and have access to all of this information, and instead now she's in the flesh, and she didn't miss it before because she didn't know she could miss it, but now she knows that she's missing it. I think there's even one of the points where, there was something there that Elaine had said, that she remembered Elaine saying it, that she had told Elaine some of these old memories, but she can't remember them herself.
Yeah.
She can remember Elaine, recounting it back to her, but she cannot remember it herself. And that would have to be, I guess, on a different scale, but similar to someone who realizes that they have dementia, the beginning stages, and they're starting to lose their faculties, and people get scared and angry, and sometimes they lash out at other people, those close to them, but it's because they have begun to realize they're losing pieces of themselves, and there could be very few things more frightening. And I know this is different; it's on a different scale and different methods, but still, you see her being afraid because she knows she's losing part of who she is. It's something that should be there, and she has no control over that. So it does make me feel sorry for her. I wish there was some way to recapture that, and of course we know how that comes full circle.
Right, eventually.
Yes, but it makes me really feel for her suffering and what she's going through, because that sounds like it wouldn't be bad. And she tries to play it off like there's nothing to it. Well, you don't miss what you don't remember, yet inside where she keeps it hidden, there's this crying out in the darkness, just terrible pain, a sense of loss. And I don't know, it really hits me in the feels. It's one of those parts of the stories that catches me off guard. Just as in the chapter I recounted, right before, we find Birgitte standing there with the guards when Vandine is killed, and the other Aes Sedai there is, and that one always hit me pretty hard. Adelaide and Vandine seem like such sweet old women, although they're supposed to be ageless, I still picture them as little grandmotherly types. And that those deaths hurt me pretty bad. Even on the rereads, it's something I hate to see every time I come up on it, because I really like them and want to like them. But so there are different parts of the story that really, really hit you emotionally. But this thing of Birgitte losing part of her memories, that's one of those things for me.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, I'm going to take us into the end of Birgitte's story in this turning of the wheel, at least. So I'm going to take you through kind of a combined summary of A Memory of Light, Chapter 12, and the Epilogue also. So Chapter 12, which is called A Shard of a Moment, finds Birgitte leading a group of Aiel stealthily through Brame Wood, hunting a fist of Trollocs that outnumbered them. And so you might remember from our Talmanis episodes, a couple of episodes back, that they're in Brame Wood because they have just secured, well, not really secured, but I guess tamped down the Trolloc situation in Andor, and they've chased the remaining Trollocs out of the city. They're now chasing them through Bramewood and attempting to make it to Kyrian, where there is also some shadow spawn trouble. So that's where we're finding ourselves right now. The Trollocs are having to stay off of the road because the band and the Queen's Guards are on the road using and guarding the dragons. And the Trollocs are fleeing into the forest to escape the dragons because they really aren't useful in the forest itself off the road. So because of that, Birgitte is leading this little stealth party through Bramewood, picking off Trolloc fists one at a time. So they're hunting this one fist of Trollocs that has about 50 members right now, greater than the number of AMoL that Birgitte has with her. But even though they've got small numbers, there's no way that these higher numbered Trollocs could out-sneak or out-maneuver them in this environment, or really any environment. I mean, they're AMoL and Birgitte. Yes. So Birgitte herself has lived as a bandit in this forest in a past life, at least once, and she spent a lot of time here in Tel'aran'rhiod with Ch12. So seemingly by instinct, she led her AMoL to a cave, and but she didn't have any conscious memories of it anymore. More of her was slipping away like that every day. And since she was ripped untimely from Tel'aran'rhiod, was she still going to be tied to the horn? If not, she would never be with Ch12 again. But there was no time to think of that now. The Trolloc fist came blundering past, and her group took down around 20 of their number on the first rush. They eventually picked off the rest who had tried to flee. Then after the attack, she has some time for reflection again. She remembered again her time here with Ch12 in the world of dreams, but then it slipped away from her like sand between her fingers. What was she just thinking of? There was no recapturing it. She couldn't tell anymore. Could a hero become unbound from the horn? She would need to ask Hawkwing, or had she already done so and forgotten that? But this fretting was useless right now. She signaled to her AMoL that she would scout and they would follow her. They came upon another fist of Trollocs, but this time it was too large for her number to take them on, and the Trollocs didn't spot them, so she ordered a retreat back to camp. And then this chapter continued with a brief Rand perspective and a Perrin point of view. Perrin's also in Bramewood, actually. But that's where chapter 12, A Shard of a Moment, ends. We next find Birgitte's perspective in the epilogue of A Memory of Light called To See the Answer. At this point, she had already been decapitated by Doylan Mellar, also known as David Hanlon, and returned along with the other heroes of the Horn after Olver summoned them. So it turns out she was still bound to the Horn and had not come undone from it. After the last battle was won on all fronts, they were holding a funeral ceremony for Rand, or Rand's old body, as we now know. Birgitte's point of view begins with her sticking around for the ceremony before returning to the world of dreams, even though she could feel a slight tug that she would need to leave soon. Even without the warder bond, she knew there was something Elaine was not telling her. But she did know what the Queen was planning with the horn, to keep it for Andor, as she accused Elaine anyway, and Birgitte had the truth of it out of her as directly as it would ever come. Perhaps, Elaine said. Birgitte then confessed it was a good thing she had sent Oliver away with it then, to hide it somewhere no one could ever find it, so that he, the artifact, and the heroes themselves could never be used for political ends. Elaine sighed, but she thanked her for taking that choice away from her. But it was time for them to part. Elaine was pretty sad about it, but for Birgitte it was bittersweet, because she's not actually getting pulled back into the world of dreams as she initially thought. It turns out that Ch12 had already been born sometime before, and Birgitte herself needed to embody a baby that was about to be born somewhere. She was happy at the prospect of getting to grow up to find Ch12 again. She urged Elaine to be happy for her, and said that perhaps they would meet again anyway. And I quote the last of this perspective, Birgitte smiled, then closed her eyes and let herself drift away, end quote. And thus is an ending to Birgitte Silverbow's story in A Memory of Light.
The chapter there, chapter 12 in A Memory of Light, A Shard of a Moment, again, we get into that whole thing with her losing part of herself and her memories, and that's so painful for me. But I just had this little thing that every time I've read this, even my first time through the story, when it got to the point that she could remember having been a bandit in these woods. And I put it together in my mind. She's a bandit. We know she's a good guy. She's still a hero of the Horn. So she was not just a bandit who was out robbing anybody. And she's a wonderful archer. She is part of the Robin Hood legend.
You're right.
and that one comes to me every time, and then I forget it, once we move away from that, because there's so many grand things going on in the story. So it doesn't mean she's, the sum total of it, but she's part of the Robin Hood legend in my mind, at least. So I love that little tie-in, and I assume it was done intentionally. But yeah, it's one of those wonderful tie-ins there. And I'm really impressed that the AMoL will let her scout. Because the AMoL, they always have scouts in any group they send out with, especially if they're veiled and fighting, especially if they're fighting Trollocs or any kind of shadow spawn. And the fact that the group would let her go ahead and be a scout and lead them that shows just how great she is at what she does. This is not just a pretty, flashy woman who could shoot a bow and arrow. She's good on her feet. She's good in the forest, because there are none better than the AMoL. So if she can equal them, this girl has got some mad skills in the forest. And I love that. I think, again, that raises my estimation of the kind of person she is, the kind of warrior that she is. And she would have to be a hero of the Horn, but still, you love to see that in action, even in these little tiny details. So, I think that's still a wonderful thing there. And then we hit on, in that epilogue, one of the other things that really hurt me badly. This one ties with watching Varen die, with watching Oliver cry over Bella as she dies, and that's when Birgitte is killed. I mean, that one hurt so bad. First time through, I was just shocked. I mean, it's like, Mellar stabs her through the stomach and then just beheads her, and it's just so matter of fact. It's just done, and I was just speechless. And on my reread, knowing it was about to happen, I was speechless. It is one of those moments that hurts me every time. But then we get that sunshine of joy when the Horn of Valir sounds, and there she is standing over her dead body and fighting to save Elaine again. And she has all of her memories back. That's one of the first things when they can talk. One of the first things she tells Elaine, it's all back. All of my memories are back. And you just get this shining joy at that moment. That is one of the more awesome comeback, shining moment, victory visions of any grand epic story. This is one that really stands out in my mind, because not only does she come back? I mean, we had that in the Lord of the Rings with Gandalf. You have that earlier in this story with Moiraine dying, coming back. But this one, I mean, is such a quick turning. You're not over the pain of it before there she is, silvery, standing over her own body. I mean, it's one of those beautiful cinematic moments that will forever be captured in my memory. And I love this about the story. It turns that pain into almost instant joy. You want to stand up and shout at that moment. Just, yes, hooray. She's back. So yeah, one of the better Birgitte moments. And I really can't think of Birgitte anymore without at some point in my mind coming to that moment. That awesome victory lap of killing Mellar, who had just killed her. So, it's...
one of the few times somebody gets to kill somebody back. Not the only time in the series, though.
They get to kill their own murderer, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was a beautiful one. And then at the end, when she tells Oliver, or reflects how she had told Oliver to take that horn and put it somewhere where no one would ever find it, throw it into the depths of the ocean. It kind of, in a way, makes you feel like that the heroes of the Horn are tired of being tied to the Horn. But they're still heroes. They're still spun out, as we see, happens to Birgitte at this moment. She's getting ready to be born into the world as someone else. So they still get to be heroes. They still get to have a part in the story, the grand story of the pattern. Yet at the at the same time, they're not tied to that horn. We're just like sitting around waiting to be called again. Oh no, here we go. And that bothered me the first time through the story. It's like, but that's such a cool part of the story. The Horn of Valir has been with us literally since the first book. And, it's been an element in this story, a big element in the story. So you hate for that to end. Yet, in reflection, it's as though the whole purpose of the horn was to assist Rand in, resealing up the Dark One's prison and, to bring about this positive ending to this battle between good and evil, darkness and light. There would be others, and there would be other mechanisms for those other times. But it was as if the horn was created for this moment. And then, after that, it can really only be abused. It can't really be used.
Yeah, I didn't read it as the heroes being weary of ever, not wanting to do this again. I read it more as really what you said at the end, that it can't be abused. I think she was concerned about Elaine personally becoming too power hungry and a little too Machiavellian, I suppose, in her role as queen. She's concerned about this young woman's development as a person and who she's going to be as a leader. And I think because of that, she wants to take away the temptation for Elaine to have the type of power that really no ruler should have in this world, especially when there's no just existential threat to all living beings like there was. Maybe that's what the horn really should be for, although they didn't seem to object to being called to fight the Shan-Chan either, so I don't know that that's all that they're for. But I do think that them just belonging to any one nation is extremely dangerous. And I think it makes sense that Matt was the horn sounder and it was tied to him for so long, because Matt doesn't have allegiance to any nation.
Yes, that's right.
He doesn't care about those types of things. So he worked well as a horn sounder.
He didn't even know he was Andorran until
right.
Pretty good ways into the story. Yes.
Exactly. He's just fighting for people. Whereas Oliver is a child and is, because of that, too easily manipulated. The horn being tied to a child like that is just inappropriate. And I think that Birgitte is not only looking out for Elaine and taking away temptation for her to be kind of corrupted by something that's way too tempting in her power, but also to protect Oliver because he doesn't need to be controlled in that way. He needs to be able to have his own autonomy over his life, and obviously he needs somebody caring for him and helping him to make decisions about what he's doing in his life. For now, it's not something he can do on his own at his small age, but I don't know that he would ever be free even as an adult, still being tied to the horn, and his life would be in danger too, because competing nations would probably want to assassinate him if they knew his tie to it. So I think it was probably more of a personal level. But that's just more of how I read it. If I had seen her conversation with Oliver, we might know more. Right. But it's so hard to read something from just this little snippet we have here.
Right. And plus we get to the fact that, I remember Hawkwing told Matt that, no matter what you thought, we don't fight for just anyone. So, the time of them coming back, as the ghost heroes to fight is over. So it needs to be over. Although in my mind, again, it's just my headcanon, I have to wonder, does Oliver hide it someplace where nobody would ever think to look, except he himself when he's grown and he's going back to the visit the land of the Elfin and Edelfin for his answers? Does he plan on using the horn maybe to get him out of there? Would it work there? I mean, it's things we don't know, and I'm not saying he would. It's just one of those things I wonder if that was something in his mind that, well, hey, I've got this and I can use it at least one time, and then I can destroy it once I've used it for what I need. Just one of those spin-off stories that we can carry on in our own imaginations that we won't get with we won't get the wheel of time, but I love to play what if, and that's one of my kind of what if scenarios now is, what if Oliver decides to go bury it out in the desert somewhere, but he knows where, and go back for it at some point in time. So, would be fun to know. But I agree, the horn needs to be melted down, destroyed, something. Its time of being used is over, because I could see it becoming something that wars were fought over, sort of the quest for the Holy Grail, where nations went to war to get this, thing of power, supposedly. So, and changing the fate of nations. And it needs to be taken out of the equation because...
Yeah, but I don't think it's permanent. I mean, it's going to have to be back in the next time a third age rolls around.
If the horn was made once, they can make another one. Yeah.
Right. Well, I don't think it will ever be actually destroyed. I think it will just be, even if it were on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, we've seen how the world gets geographically rearranged quite a bit between ages sometimes, so it could resurface at some point.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of that. In my mind, it had to have an origin. So, if something else is ever needed, something else will be created, and it might be the Holy Grail next time instead of the Horn of Valere. But it's definitely an integral part of this story. But its job pretty much ended with this part of the turning of the wheel. Maybe something else is needed, or maybe it's needed for something different next time. But its job and the way it's being used, I think, is pretty much closed out. There may not be an ending to the turning of the wheel, but there's endings to this part of the story and that part of the story as things move on into other parts, because that's the way the pattern works.
Anyway. And speaking of endings, I was thinking about trying to sum this one up by figuring out what you think we learned from Birgitte's point of view, unique to her point of view, not just learning about her like from other people's perspectives. So did you have any thoughts about what we learned from her, thoughts compared to just seeing her from the outside? I know we just pointed out here's some Birgitte things this whole episode, but most of these are things we've also seen otherwise. So I didn't know if like you had a way to kind of put a bow on anything we found here. And that's okay if you don't on the spot. I can edit all this out and you just wrap something up.
I could say that in my mind, at least, and this is a small lesson to learn from her, but it would be to be that honest like she is. That forthright with people. You don't have to play at being someone you're not. You don't have to act one way around this group and that way around another. Just be the same. Be yourself, because that's when we see Birgitte as the happiest. When we see her at the most sad is when she's losing herself and has trouble being herself because she's afraid of losing all sense of identity. But just don't try to play at being someone else. Just be who you are, because that's enough. And that's who you were intended to be. You were spun out of the pattern to play a part. Play that part. Don't try to be someone else and play their part.
I think that was a great summary. I don't even want to add mine because it was more of a yours was like a level 3 answer, like, oh, here's what we can personally take away into our everyday lives. That's awesome. I was doing more of I was thinking on a different level of like, what's the function of her point of view as far as what we learn in the story. It's still level 2, I guess, in story stuff. You
can say it and edit it and put yours first if you'd rather.
I think that it would probably work better that way because yours, I think, summed everything up so well. Sorry,
you did put me on the spot. I was grasping.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's why I can't complain. I'll pay for it in the editing time. It's fine. So I think that I had trouble finding anything that was unique to Birgitte's point of view. So some characters we learn a lot by being in their heads. Like Matt, we learn quite a lot about seeing in his head versus how other people see him.
Yes.
Birgitte, she's so much more of a supporting character to Elaine's story, and definitely a character on her own, but she just has so few points of view, and we don't actually seem to learn a lot extra from them. Similar to ToM, I think. We get most of ToM from outside of his head, and getting in his head maybe could reveal a bit too much. And in Birgitte's head, I wonder if the reason her point of view comes so late in the story is because by now she's losing enough memories that we can't get too divine of a perspective on everything and know too much.
Yes.
So I think her perspective does not add a lot about her character per se. It repeats most of the things we've seen from outside her, but it seems to more just support Elaine's story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she does, but she's such a wonderful part of the story. I remember.
I'm not trying to say that she's not important in that way. Right. That's a good point.
I remember my first time through when she was pulled out of the world of dreams. I was sitting there thinking, that is so hokey. Why would they put something like that in the story? But then you can't really imagine this story without Birgitte Silverbow. Because we learn so much, not just about her, but we learn so much about Teleranriad. We learn so much about how the wheel works, the pattern of people being spun back out again. It's one thing to hear Moiraine explain it in the beginning, but it's something very different to see that through a character. And Birgitte is that character. She's that connection between what has been and what will be. And we get that sense of the story going on because her last scene is of her, I'm being born to someone else, just letting yourself go and letting it happen. That to me, there's just beauty in that, in seeing the continuity of the story. So Birgitte is a very real tie into what has happened, but yet what's going to be in the story, even if another word is never written, other than some fan fiction out there, in our minds that we see that story continuing, we see it going on, and she's that real link, that real connection to that. So, yeah, very, very important.
Yeah,
character.
Absolutely. She's incredibly important for the world building and gives us an emotional investment into some of that. Yeah, so I really like your take on that.
And I just like it because I think blonde chicks are cute. Sorry. I hope all of our listeners will join us next time for Season 3 after we take a brief break. The character for Season 3 has yet to be announced, so send us any of your requests and keep your eye out for a Twitter poll because we might just throw one of those your way. Please stay tuned for any announcement about release dates for the new season.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane. That's Lajaradayne. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen, and of course, as Giskel said, let us know who you'd like to hear us talk about next. You can contact us by emailing lajaradane@gmail.com or on Twitter @mind_wheel, so stay tuned and look there for the poll. To support the show and get access to some perks, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind. It's pretty good. I'm just, I've been busy but tired. Nothing specific going on. Just it's finals. Friday was the last day of finals, and it was graduation and everything. And I have to enter grades Tuesday by noon, or by Tuesday at noon. So I still got quite a bit to do. So I'm glad that this was part of our interlude season. Like I've said before, this looks like it works really well with the academic calendar. I did have to miss editing, so I'm behind an episode, but I just put a post on Podbean so that people who are subscribed could probably still see the post and just say, hey, we're going to be back by next week. It's just I fell behind because of work, so I hate that I had to do that, but I've been working really late after dinner and stuff. That's something I don't normally try to do, but it's that time of year.
Yes, and this does not pay the bills. It's fun, but it's a hobby podcast. So yeah, we've got to take care of the important things first. My washing machine, I was washing clothes, and it's like it had a bunch of suds, and the washer kept stopping. I had to restart it 2 or 3 times. Add some vinegar to help get rid of all the soap bubbles. I don't know why I didn't use much detergent, but it really sudsed up a lot.
So you can just like, even if you did like another rinse cycle or something, it was still...
Well, that's what I did. I went back
yeah.
and did another rinse cycle. I had to do that twice.
Yeah.
And still I'd go in there and it was just full of suds. Well, not full, but you move clothes and you see wads of it, which means it was sensing too many. So I just poured in the vinegar, like your mom said, and then I started over, complete wash cycle, high water level on cold, and just, I mean, the clothes were clean. They just needed to rinse, but it started all over with a whole new cycle with no extra soap.
Yeah, what a pain
just to get it rinsed. Yeah, and it looks like it's almost finished, but that's the first time we've had to do that in months. So, now, I feel pretty good today. Yesterday, I got pretty tired. I was in a good mood, but I had mowing the yard, and it got most of the front yard done, and one of the deck bearings just disintegrated on the mower. And I had to pull the deck off. Went down to and bought one, and it was about two prices. Usually they're very good on prices for mower parts, but I could get these online for half of what I paid. But I had to have it right then, and got it all back together and got the yard mowed, most of it weed eated. But he had already come in and taken a shower, so I had to finish all that up. But,
oh, man.
But it's just one of those things. It's like everything you do, you move forward 2 steps, you move back 1. You keep going until you finally get there.
Yeah, I had a setback yesterday that tired me out quite a bit too. So I thought I was going to be able to finish grading my last 10 papers for one class after dinner last night. That was my plan. But when I was going to break for dinner, I went to go check the litter box, and Boots had a very liquid accident outside of the box. And so I had to spend a long time cleaning that up. I had to go take the mat and everything outside and hose it down and use multiple cleaning products on the floor just to kind of get my peace of mind about that. And she has seemed to be okay since then, but I've had to, I want to keep her indoors to make sure I have control over her diet and activities and see if any of that could have been influencing it. I don't know if she ate something weird outside or got stressed out by something or what made it happen.
It's been, 2 weeks since the surgery? Is that right?
Yeah, and I actually took her to the vet just the other day for...
Good.
Well, actually, I thought her microchip had migrated. I felt it under her skin. And they've done that before. They put them between the shoulder blades, and I've heard some people say they migrate down into the arm, or into the leg, rather. So I thought that's what it was. I took her in. Turns out that wasn't it at all. It was she just had scabs from some old wounds.
Oh, okay.
And they cut them off because they were really tough and leathery and kind of sticking out and poking and weren't ever really going to flake off or anything, it looked like. So she's totally fine beyond that. From what the vet could say, they were very pleased with her healing. They were like, wow, it doesn't look like she had been spayed a week ago. It was like a week and 2 days at that point. So I don't think it would have been anything surgery related.
Good. I mean, I didn't think so that long time. I was just making sure my memory was right. On that,
So now, I mean, Tuesday it'll be 2 weeks, so it's still not quite been that long, but she's very recovered from that. But I don't really know what was going on, but I then got so anxious from doing that cleaning and being so grossed out that I couldn't eat dinner, and I didn't eat for another 2 hours or something. I just really had a hard time getting over that. So the rest of my evening was, I wasn't going to work anymore. I was done.
That's...
And then I saw...
it's just the kind of things you have to deal with.
Saw a new young cat out in the yard that looked almost exactly like her too, and I thought for a minute she had gotten out. She's got a little, I don't know, niece or, younger sister or something out there. It looks just like her.
Some kind of doppelganger there.
Yep.
Oh, that's funny.
But I'm actually, attempting to record from the living room today because the last time I told you she was well behaved. It turns out that wasn't the case.
Right.
Spent a lot of time distracting her and then eventually putting her outside because she was out the door just meowing and waiting for me to come out. So this time she's just sleeping next to me on the ottoman, and I don't know if it's echoey for you. I'm going to see how it sounds on the recording later and see if there's anything else I could do.
I hear a hint of it, but not bad, and not enough that I didn't really notice it until you said that. So I think we're going to be good. So.
Okay. Well, I may end up doing something like this, doing this in here in the living room or in there in the little brown office and doing something to sound treat it a little better for the long term, just because I think around this time of day, she starts to beg, even though it's like 2 hours until dinner. She starts to beg for dinner, and so she can be a little annoying.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so that's where I'm at today. Sorry about rambling. So you ended up getting your mower fixed. Do you know what was going on with the washer? Is that anything you've been able to troubleshoot?
No, I think it's going to be fine. It's probably a little bit of residual soap buildup over time, and then some of it broke loose. I don't know. I'm guessing.
Yeah,
it seems to be fine. I just had to keep stopping what I was doing and go deal with it. And that put me about 10 minutes behind.